My name is Daniela Bleichmar. I am the director of the Levan Institute for the Humanities, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to this book chat where we will be discussing Maggie Nelson's latest book, Like Love, Essays and Conversations, out from Graywolf Press this year. Joining us today are David Kishik, who is professor of philosophy at Emerson College, Michel Chaouli, who is professor of German and comparative literature at Indiana University Bloomington, and the conversation will be moderated by Jane Hugh, who is assistant professor of English at the University of Southern California. Our partners for today's conversation are the Department of English and the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies at USC. We invite everyone who can turn on their camera to please do so. It is so much more interesting to be looking at faces rather than at names on the screen. So please turn on the camera so that Maggie can see all her friends and fans here for this conversation. Our program is quite simple. Maggie will very, very briefly introduce her book, and then Michel and will her in conversation for roughly an hour, 35 minutes, and we will have the last 15 to 20 minutes for questions from attendants. We will ask you to please raise your Zoom hand to do so. So once again, thank you for joining us. And Maggie, congratulations on the book, and please tell us about it.
All right. Can you all hear me? Yes, thumbs up. It's so fun to see people's faces. I feel like I've only been doing Zooms. I can see Mark, whatever you're eating, it looks great. Yeah, cheers. Thank you for asking me to do this, Daniela. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Michel. Thank you, David. I'm really honored to be in your company and excited to talk to you all. And it's kind of fun for me because this book, Like Love, it came out in April, and I did a lot in April and May, but I haven't really been talking about it for a few months, so this is fun for me. Basically, the brief story behind this book is that I guess it's my 11th book, but despite the genre designation of like essay that people maybe have applied to others of my books, I've never really, I don't consider any of my other books really having much to do with the essay per se. And this is the first book that I put together where I said, essays on the cover, essays and conversations. And, the book is really meaningful to me in part because it was like a lot of fun to put together. And it's a record of a lot of fun and meaningful engagements. And that's in part why it's titled Like Love, which I try and make clear in the introduction vis-a-vis the Hilton Als quote that it comes from. It's not like an unmitigated, all easy like love, but that I made a decision long ago, probably in graduate school, that I wouldn't really spend much of my time as a critic writing about things I didn't like, but that I would write about things I liked or loved. Again, not in a simple fashion, but in a way that I wanted to draw more attention to them and people's work who I wanted to spend more time with. So this book is a record of those things vis-a-vis essays that I was, most often commissioned to write by a gallery or museum, the artists themselves in some cases. Some of them, like there's an essay on Prince that I just wrote on an airplane a few days after he died. Some of them are book reviews, longish book reviews, like the long piece on Eve Sedgwick's The Weather Improves, or on Ben Lerner's 10:04. Some of them are oral introductions or oral talks I gave, like there's a little piece on Peggy Awish's film The Dead Man, on Alice Notley's The Descent of Valette, and then a tribute that I gave in person to Hilton Als at the Hammer Museum. So some of them were spoken. A lot of them are gallery essays. There's kind of two really long pieces in the book, one on Matthew Barney and one on Carolee Schneemann, both of which are about 10,000 words. And the Carolee piece is the one that I gave to you all as a sample, I think because it represents a kind of, some of these pieces are shorter, but that was a more studied investment. And I think it also hits on a lot of the themes that unite these essays on artists, which have to do with the nature of art, the relationship of art to life, the relationship of art to language, maybe art to garbage, art to gender, a lot of different things. So anyway, it has, I'll just finish up there in that, a lot of these pieces are on artists that no one's maybe ever heard of. Some of them are on people like Judith Butler or, Bjork. There's a conversation with, people that people probably have heard of. I guess the last thing I'll say is that it's called Essays and Conversations because at some point while putting it together, I just felt like there was a liveliness to a back and forth of conversations, whether they were things I'd published with people done on Zoom or via email, that felt like they kind of literalized and enlivened the sociality that I was that's behind a lot of these commissioned essays, but that sometimes doesn't quite come across in that form. And so I put 7 of those conversations in with people like Jacqueline Rose, a hero of mine since I was in my 20s, to other people, Brian Blanchfield, a poet not as well known, but that is very dear to me, and same with Simone White. Anyway, so that's pretty much it. It's 22 essays and 7 conversations, and my 3 interlocutors are really esteemed critics and thinkers that I just thought would be great to be in conversation with about this project.
Great, thanks, Maggie. So I think to start us off in our conversation today, Michel will be asking the first question, and then David, and then we'll just kind of go back and forth. So I'll pass it to you, Michel.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Maggie, for the book. It's kind of amazing. I'll have a specific question to ask, but I just want to say how both daunting and refreshing and enlightening it was to be acquainted with this extraordinary range of works and figures that you engage with. I mean, they really cross so many genres, so many media, but also go up and down the cultural ladder. You're afraid of nothing, and you're willing to engage with pretty much anything and anybody, and that's kind of in itself an extraordinary feat. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for introducing me to a bunch of new people that I admit I'd never heard of. And, Hervé Guibert is now on my list. And a bunch of other writers and artists where I think, wow, okay, I need to know more. I need to know more about this. I didn't want to ask you or start by asking you anything specific about any of the works, but maybe a more general thing that connects to what you started with, the relationship of art, very broadly understood in politics. But I want to ask you about your art, not just art, but your writing. I know that your Freedom book also touches on this question. And to make it more specific, I want to go to one passage where you capture the nub of this. And it comes up a lot in many of your essays. It's something that really preoccupies you, I think. And I want to ask you about it. So you, in one of the essays, in fact, in the one on Matthew Barney, which is fantastic, you quote Leo Bersani, who's always great for these quotes. He says, the value of sexuality itself is to demean the seriousness of efforts to redeem it. The value of sexuality is to demean the seriousness of efforts to redeem it. And you like this quote, and you say, I find this a liberating thought. Not only does this approach relieve art of the whole redemption emancipation burden so often placed on it, but it also clears away a certain demand for seriousness. In other words, it makes space for play. It makes space for play. And so you put art in relation to play, which is a place where it has been since the 18th century, there's a tradition of thinking of art and play very closely with one another. So I wanted to ask you to say a little bit more about this space that you like, this space of play. And while on every page you're interested in emancipation and you're very concerned with political questions, you also clearly find them to be burdensome in some ways, and you want to be freed from that. So I want to hear more about how you feel this burden and how play opens up another space for you.
Wow, that's so great. It's so smart. And it's partly, because your own book has so much about play and that we have talked about, and that when you came as a visitor about play, that I was like just totally fascinated by. You're a great person to talk to about this space. And also, David, like, we've talked before about this redemption, emancipation burden, and you have really smart things to say on that. So I'm glad that you kind of zeroed in there, Michel, to start there. I mean, I think that you're right that this moment, it's in this chapter on Barney, and it's kind of specific to what because he works so much with like athletics and like literally constructing fields of play. It's very literal in Barney about like making a space to play. And I think also though that, but I think it can be extrapolated in the sense that, this phrase that Eve Sedgwick used a long time ago, where she talked about, how to get out of the trap of everything being kind of hegemonic, kind of subversive, and that was kind of the typical modality by which so much criticism was used. Like, oh, it kind of subverts it, but then at the end it doesn't. Like, that's a bad review, right? But a good review might be like, oh, it seems like it's going to be hegemonic, but then it subverts it. But this is a little boring, and I think that in the case of Barney, what I was trying to get at in this essay was like that perversity, which for him is a really important word. And like, he sent me towards this book called Creativity and Perversion that had been really important to him growing up. And I was like, what is this? So I ended up doing a kind of a deep dive. I mean, he's not all artists are interested in the perverse in the way that Barney is, but I think there's something that like repels redemption or emancipation about perversity and about a certain kind of play. And I think it's not in and of itself redemptive or emancipatory content wise, but that the experience for the viewer of just getting to be in that space with someone, it has liberatory effect, I guess I would say. But it's not about extrapolating an emancipatory politics from it. It's more about, maybe this is not satisfying to the more politically minded among us, but it's more about having a texture of life that knows how to occupy these different spaces without needing to reduce or instrumentalize them, I guess. And I think that's something I do look for in a lot of the art in this book. Like Tala Madani is another person I write a lot about here, a painter, Iranian American painter, that just makes extraordinary perverse spaces for play that people are always trying to make into a particular kind of critique. And Madani is very resistant of that reading of the work and is much more focused on what it means to, in a kind of classic psychoanalytic sense, like to be able to play, to be able to be there as a painter, and for us to be able to be with there as a viewer, something has kind of been achieved. So.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? So so I'm totally with you on this. But my worry about inhabiting that place is that if I do it seriously enough, if I play seriously enough, it can take me anywhere, including into regions that I find morally or politically abhorrent or or at least uncomfortable. So it's a risky endeavor to play, especially to play perversely. Do you worry about this, that you might drift in places that you actually don't want to be?
Well, it's funny that you say that, I think in part because like a previous book of mine called The Art of Cruelty, which really had a lot to do with some pretty worrisome areas, because it was specifically about work about brutality and violence. And then this book is not that, right? But I think there was a kind of ethos I developed when I was writing the cruelty book, which was that I was I think that there's a relationship of trust that like builds up with an artist when you like spend a bunch of time with them, and sometimes it doesn't build, and like you're thrown out, and you just feel like I don't want to go where you want to take me. But it's not. And I think for me, when you walk into a museum or something, you're not going to get like an affidavit of trust, or you're not going to be able to like build up trust really quickly. You might really hate what you see and wish you hadn't been brought there or whatever. But for me, as like a critic, you know, I don't write about anything that I haven't gone to the studio, spent time with the slides, you know, read the stuff, read some interviews, like poked around. And it's not like I'm looking for disqualifying content or something. I'm just deciding who I want to spend, you know, my precious time with, you know, and like what work matters. And I think, you know, there are people out there, like, I don't know, for some reason, John Waters comes to mind just because my partner was in a John Waters movie once. And like someone like John, you know, like there are artists out there like John Waters who have, you know, decade after decade after decade of track record of work that you can look at what the nature of their transgressive moves are. I mean, Barney's another one too, where you just can really look at the work over a long period of time. And I think once you kind of know what the artist's project is, you know, I'm not particularly worried that like we're gonna come out Nazis or something just because I've spent the time to know what's going on. You know, I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Should I go?
Yeah, sorry. Just go ahead, David.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm really happy that Michel asked that question, because I just want to press maybe that point and see if we can take it someplace else. I mean, I love this book so much, but I have so many questions about the idea of love and the ways it can help us to elucidate our idea of art. You're using this quote from Als, as you said, where we have those mouths that need to be filled, something wet or dry like love, or unfamiliar and savory also like love, which is the title. Now, hear me out.
Okay.
What mouth is filled with something wet and dry, if not the mouth of the believer, who receives wine and bread, which is like the blood and flesh of Christ? This might sound as a stretch, but it speaks to the idea of art as a kind of profane salvation. Again, going back to Michel's point, which you both embrace and reject in your book. So yes, there is the Matthew Barney piece where you seem to reject it. In the Moira Davey piece, you seem to embrace it. So it leads us to the second type of love, the unfamiliar and savory one. Could we see here the kind of art that is not there to save us, but to mess with us, to fuck with us, to undo us? If this is no longer Christian love, is this a kind of queer love? Which, again, I sense that to be at play in your approach to many artists and writers in this book. Mm-hmm. Either way, I'm still unsure if love is the attention you give to the work or the nourishment that the artwork gives you, or maybe both. If the mouth in the quote belongs to a baby, just waiting to be fed by the mother's milk or the writer's ink. You also mentioned the cruelty of this love-like or life-like thing that we call art, which makes me wonder, why can't we just have the real thing, to love, to live? We both know what it takes to live every day with an actual artist that we love. Though, when it comes to art, don't we have to be polyamorous? Which brings me to another line from the same essay by Als, where he says that love and conflict are the same thing. And I think you already mentioned about, you know, the conflict that you may have. I'm just wanted to ask about the conflicts you find yourself with the art that you love. And finally, and I know you don't like to do it in your writing, I'm really simply curious to hear what you have to say about the kind of art that you are indifferent to, or heavens forbid, just hate.
This is why I asked these guys to ask me questions, because I knew they weren't gonna like softball me anything along the way. But like, yeah, I mean, it's weird because, well, what to say? I mean, you picked up really correctly, especially with those 4 adjectives: wet, dry, you know, unsavory. unfamiliar. Like, Els is a really weird writer, and like I don't really understand what he means half the time, which is why I kind of express my bewilderment at that quote. Like, what is he talking about? Like, and what does it mean? Like you're saying for art to be a kind of sustenance or like consolation or all these different things it gets cast in. And like you said, I explicitly, when I was writing the introduction, which I also put in the excerpt packet, I intentionally began with this scene about my mother, and a kind of like scene of almost failed love or transmission, where you're trying to be like, don't you love this? Like, let's love something together. But yet you're not really on the same page, where I don't want to talk to her about the art that we're seeing. And I talk about then, the table, the Arendt's table of like this thing that's kind of organizing us, that we often have this wish, like if only we could just collapse the table and like maybe, as you say, like have the real thing, like the real love, but we don't actually want to collapse the table. We want something between us to talk about, and like here we all are gathered in our Zoom boxes to talk about like this little brick purple object, like because we are gathered around something together. And I think, and it's funny that you said, and I see you, Netta, but like I like when you say like now I see you because you're back, but like when you talk about living with an artist, I think like when I was saying before about being interested in like art and life, and then when you add this term love in there, like you're right, like living with two people who make things, or maybe you had a parent that made things or whatever, it makes very clear that love is also like if it's a measure of our attention or care, it's also like in this economy about time, like where do we put all that attention and care, and this idea that like if life is just about love of our closest relations or of our political comrades or whoever it is, that we would just spend all our time trying to perform nourishment in that arena. It's pretty weird that we, some of us are driven to like, perfect the syntax of a sentence for, an entire day while you have childcare, or to, as I say, like make like a whole wall of graphite squares while your mother's dying of cancer and you're not at the hospital. Like these are weird things, right? But like, I talk about this a lot in On Freedom in the chapter about art, is that like, kind of going back to Sontag and some things that she had to say about instead of like emancipation or a simulation of love or different things, that there's, I can't remember her phrase right now, but something like, wanting more texture, like to life, like more stations of that we visit. And some of those have to do with like what she calls the intensification of consciousness that focusing on art has to offer. Anyways, there's a lot there. I don't necessarily think art is like a consolation for actual love we can't have. I think that would be like, it's very boring. I think it would be much more boring to live that way if that's what we wanted it to be. I think art would be boring. And then I don't know, for your very last point about indifference or like not liking.
You can use the word hate.
What's that? Hate.
You can use the word hate, not like.
Yeah, like I think it's really. I'm really fascinated by how strongly we can all feel about things that we're taken by or that we hate, but I'm also, and this is like Ben Lerner's written a lot about this too, like it's fascinating when like we're not moved by things, or we're not moved by things that move other people, which is true for all of us. Like I think it's a source of kind of unending fascination about why we're just so gripped by something that somebody else could be like, nah, it's not for me, so I think we tend to try and turn those reactions into like an ethos or even like a morality, when I think they're much more mysterious than that, or not ethos or morality, just maybe the sign of our critical acumen. Like I know this work is good, and you think it's bad, or I know that it's bad, and you've been duped into thinking it's good. I guess just this sounds like a kind of cop out, but again, just in a much more personal fashion with putting together this book, like, these are the results of the studio visits that moved me to say yes to the essay. There have been a lot of studio visits along the way that I'm really sorry to say. I just said, I'm too busy right now. I'm sorry, I can't produce the essay, just because for whatever reason, like the art could be really good, but here's the other thing, the art can be really good, but I have no words. Like it doesn't incite words, which is something that Michel's written a lot about. Like, you're moved by something, and then the next thing that sometimes can happen is I want to tell somebody about it. Like there's something in me that wants to write sentences about this, to say more. And I sometimes it happens to me very strongly. Like I just feel like I have something to say, and sometimes I like things but don't. So I find all that kind of mysterious. And this book is kind of an account of that mystery. You know.
Thank you.
Michelle?
I had another question, but I actually want to follow up on this wonderful conversation about love. You say in Maggie in the preface that that you come across works that demanded your attention. I gave it, and words followed. So it's like in 10 words, you've given the essence of criticism, basically, right there, and it's beautiful. So it seemed like with the love, as David was talking about it, it's neither that it is given to you by the object, nor do you give it, but it is a mysterious and ambiguous in between state of a active passivity or passive activity. It's something, and it seems like that's the space. Maybe I put it as a question, the space you're looking for in play. It's not quite being the foot soldier of a cause that you reject rightly. I think you say I don't want to be a reader in search of that's actually your phrase, foot soldier in a cause. But it's also not being oblivious to that, but it's precisely this strange in-between state. And I wondered, there Barthes, that you quote once, who says, I don't want to be a master, but I also don't want to be a student, but rather I want to be what Nietzsche calls an artist, who's maybe something in between the two. And I'm wondering whether love or like love or criticism or this kind of artistry, is this for you, this in-between state of being active, passive, passive, active?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just reading this Kate Briggs essay this morning about Roland Barthes, where she says something like, I don't know if she was saying Barthes said this or she was extrapolating, but that like everyone loves to learn, but no one likes to be taught, you know? And I think like,
That's nice.
yeah, well, I thought about it a lot because I don't know, it reminded me of like therapist friends of mine who say that like everyone comes to them saying like, what should I do? And then like you tell them something to do and they're like, don't tell, why are you telling me what to do? Like, it's like the precise thing nobody actually wants. So there's this like in between space. And I think, you know, the Barthes thing about mastery, I mean, I think, just the fact of this book of essays is in some ways like a kind of, it's like I don't have any degrees in art history or art criticism or anything, and I didn't come up, you know, like I'm like I don't struggle with concerns about being like an amateur or a dilettante or something, because I just feel like I don't feel like my attention that I give is like it's rigorous in my way, you know, which I feel confident in, but it's not rigorous in like a disciplinary way. So I guess what I'm trying to say, and I don't know if I'm quite getting at anything in the heart of your question, but is that like I kind of come my own third way through teaching, learning, through non-disciplinary fashions to kind of to to see and apprehend and write. And I guess the only thing I would say about the first part of what you were talking about was that just about, I can't quite remember what you said, but it was like love's neither the object or like the criticism, but something that kind of grows between them vis-a-vis attention. Is that like, you know, I say in the preface, but and I'm kind of saying it a little jokingly, but it's not really a joke, which is to say that like that I talk about how like a lot of these essays, like if my own spirit's dim, sometimes it's only by like immersion in someone else's vision that I feel reattached to life, you know. And I think that it can be a kind of misapprehension that like the critic is someone who walks around really interested and really moved and really vividly attentive to things, when in fact like there may be a kind of depressive state where not much, where there might be like a, not like a hunger to be moved and a frustration that more isn't really doing that. And I think to me, a combination of like a little bit of a spark by seeing the work, but also research, like the immersion process in what matters to somebody else, really makes me feel more alive, you know. And I think it's often, it's just dissimilar enough. Like I don't look to write about artists who like have exactly my background or my hobby horses or whatever. So it has to be like dissimilar enough that I'm kind of, and sometimes maybe like I disagree just enough with the project or something for there to be like a frisson. But I find it really, you know, undepressing to, like I love going to like a painter and being like, what were you reading when you were painting these? And they'll give me like 5 books. I'll just go home and read them all. Like again, in the Madani essay, she loves Hawthorne. I was like, what about Hawthorne? Does Tala like so much, you know? And like, I love these puzzles. And then the key is like tethering them back to the work all the time so that you're not just in like an English, you know, department reverie about the idea of painting in Hawthorne, but that you're actually like looking and like testing your ideas and your thoughts against your lived experience of the painting so that you're not like in your own fantasy land, you know.
Well, that's a wonderful account of what one might call your method, which is not a method, it's a style kind of, or maybe it's a mood, but because it comes through in every essay, and yet every essay is also completely attentive to the object. And that's a kind of a miraculous thing to pull off, I think. I really admire that. I don't know how you do. Well, you just described how you do that with a lot of work, but it's really fantastic. I wonder, I wrote down a phrase that you use several times, and I wonder if it relates to what you just described, where you say there's no true way out. There is no true way out other than through. So it's about out and through. So were you just now describing the way through? That is, you can't just impose from outside questions, but you have to go through the work, through the concerns of the artist, through the logic of the work itself? Or am I imposing something else now on what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, I really hate reading criticism that I just feel like has its own points to make and then got excitedly happy that there was an object convenient enough in the world to hang them on. It just is like a thing I just really don't like, you know? And I feel like I can smell it when it's happening. And I just feel bad for the art when that happens, because I just feel like, oh, that's too bad. Like your work got put into this service. And so, yeah, and it's like you say, it is work, because like it means you have to keep the thumbnails of the prints on your computer screen, or you have to rewatch the video, but like you can't, at least I can't, like write a bunch of good sounding sentences that make good sounding points, but then if I rewatch the video or something and I don't feel like I've drifted, then I have to recollect and be like, what really is this video doing? And how is that different from what I would like it to do, or what I thought it was doing the first time I watched it, or something like that.
David?
Yeah, I mean, because, I mean, you do the work, as the Hilton Als essay says about Alice Neal, I think. And I mean, you are a good scholar. And I'm just thinking about this in-betweenness that you were talking about just a second ago. And I mean, my sense that work just falls between the cracks of, you know, what audience is it for? And I mean, this event is hosted by university, and you and Jane and Michel and me were professors. So I just wanted to reflect right now about the impact of what you do on academic work. I mean, I can speak for myself, but I'm convinced that I'm far from alone in sensing that you gave scholars a kind of license to feel on the page, for thinking and aliveness to exist side by side, and for abstract writing to be personal and otherwise, and for offering us so many lines of flight away from the Academy of Misery, I think you said a second point, and toward the kind of science that Nietzsche called gay. What is also remarkable for me is that many academics do their professional work, which they themselves see as dreary, basically for the sake of their promotion, and then compensate it with more fun work on the side for the sake of their heart. But the thing is that I don't ever see that there is a kind of like Dr. Nelson and Miss Maggie. There is no split in your publication output, but some kind of an inspiring continuum, right? I mean, I always read you as a philosopher, and I approach Like Love as a book that is searching for a theory of art. And like Michel says about the way you're focusing on each one of the singular objects, I mean, you're not a rationalist that deducts, but an empiricist that inducts. We experience with you singular pieces of art, and then we get a sense of your overall vision of it. And what I think is most remarkable is that you're always super focused on the conversations we want to be having, not the bad feeling we share with each other, as you say in the essay on Fred Moten. You're dedicated to the art and writing that you love, as you said originally, that you decided early on. I wonder if it's like a Sedgwick influence or otherwise, instead of the kind of critique that the paranoid or hole-poking minds of many academics like to do. You are telling Wayne Consternbaum in 2006 that there is no school of Maggie, but almost 2 decades later, do you see how the kind of reparative, creative, and let's not forget just readable work that you exemplify is kind of changing the way writing is done in the university?
Wow, well, that will be a big charge for me to be a part of, but I think that it's interesting because when I was in grad school, like whatever in like the 90s, I feel like these same conversations were going on. I mean, I think they've been going on ever since people started to get worried about a drift to something more specialized or esoteric, or at least when I was coming up, all the concern was about French theory or whatever, like and I always felt from the beginning, I just felt from the beginning like I'm not going to participate in these paranoias or partitions or anything. Like I'm just gonna, and I mean, this is too boring and autobiographical, but like when I started grad school, like I worked in restaurants and bars in New York, and I always just thought, well, if I don't like it, I'll just continue, I'll manage the bar, like I was like, I'm not going to go.
Better money than adjuncting, right? It's better money than adjuncting. I remember that. Yeah.
I made like 5 times as much bartending as I would adjuncting. And I was like, no way am I taking the ferry to College of Staten Island at CUNY to like, keep my job in the East Village. But the point was that like, I don't know what I would have done if I'd like started to starve or something, although adjuncting, as we all know on this call, is not like a ticket out of starvation. But I wasn't like, I wasn't like dead set on a career in the academy per se. I just wanted to be a writer. And I think that's why I, didn't go to grad school for a while and did writing about art in New York, and then went to CUNY, the City University of New York, where Wayne Consternbaum and Eve Sedgwick, and at the time like Luc Manand and other people taught, who I saw as kind of having these multiple lives, where and like Wayne Consternbaum, to whom this book is partially dedicated, used to take us on the weekend on walks through Chelsea, where he knew like seemingly all of the gallery owners, and would like he would just like, you could just join Wayne's, Saturday Chelsea walk and see all, and just to me that was like worth the price of admission to grad school, was just to like be like, oh, if I'm with these people, I can go to galleries and the gallery owner will like show me the like behind the scenes sketches, and I'll get to see like the work in storage, and I'll get to hear funny stories about the artists. And so there was a lot in that, in like those early choices. I feel like that there was no like Dr. Nelson on the horizon. There was just like a kind of a hope and a dream about a kind of more like public intellectual life. I mean, I feel very grateful that I don't know what's choice and what's happenstance and what's privilege, and like there's a whole stew there. So I don't want to make it sound too like autonomous in terms of how things have gone for me. But I will say that like, given my worries about what you're describing about doing work that I was not, that was like the part of the job where you're like, oh, I have to do this for tenure, or I have to write this dull book, or I have to go to this conference I don't want to. Again, whether it was luck or overdetermined, I ended up not getting a job in any normal university. I got hired in my first full-time job at art school, and with no tenure, where there was no eye on my shoulder for over a decade, and I wrote 7 or 8 books in that position, and I just didn't. It wasn't really. And then I moved to USC from there. So I just feel kind of lucky, like I dodged a bullet. But I don't say that to people on this call, especially those of you who are my students, of which I see many of you. Like I did get a PhD, and I did write a dissertation, which I wasn't sure I should publish because I didn't love every sentence in it. Like it wasn't a musical lyric book. It was like a real scholarly book. It was about women in the New York school, but I totally stood behind it too. Like, I mean, I'm flattered, Debbie, that you said I'm a good scholar, because like, I do feel like I felt like there was no reason not to publish the more straight ahead scholarship that I actually had spent the hours and time doing, and I learned a tremendous amount from that, I mean, like I'm publishing, you heard it here first. I'm publishing a zine on Taylor Swift and Sylvia Plath in a couple of weeks. It's like a 10,000 word essay about them. And I was insisting that the zine publisher, like that we fact check it and everything. And that they were like, it's just a zine. And I was like, we fact check, like we fact checked, we lyric check, we permission check, like we do this, and I think, and they were like, oh, I love it that you care. But like, that's the part of me that's like, yeah, like it's for real. Like I want to get it right, and academia helps you have that as a value,
Swift studies.
What's that?
Swift studies.
Swift studies.
It's a real thing. Thank you so much for that lively conversation. We have just under 15 minutes to open up the dialogue to everyone in the Zoom room here. So yeah, I think we're per the chat, raise your hand if you have a question. Daniela.
Why not? I have so many questions, but I'll ask just one. There has been a lot of mention in this conversation about labor and economies of various kinds. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the market economy that contemporary art is part of, because criticism of contemporary art is related not only to all the wonderful things that you mentioned, what people read and think and take in and put out, and this incredible creation, but also to the market value of the art that is sold by galleries and acquired by collectors and museums, and criticism can drive prices up or down. So how do you square that with the other kinds of labor and economies that you've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say that, I've really, and this probably won't be a satisfying answer, but both here and in the Art of Cruelty and in the chapter on art non-freedom, I really explicitly don't like participate in a kind of institutional critique of the art market or the art world. And I do so in part because there are so many people who are doing that, maybe for 3 reasons. 1, because there are people doing that I think are doing a great job. 2, because I actually find your formulation about what criticism does for value of art maybe a little bit too hopeful, in that my own lived experience with like teaching artists and living with artists and being around artists is that, and this is made very apparent by that chapter on Carolee Schneemann, like is that cultural capital and like capital in the art world really don't have a strong relationship at this moment in time. So you can have someone like Carolee that everyone thinks of as like one of the most famous feminist, artists, of the 20th century who sold precisely one piece of work in her lifetime, and it was a series of photographs to the MoMA, and lived on basically nothing, and like charity of strangers. So it's like, and yet there's monograph after monograph about her in the world. And so, I mean, she's even like spoofed in, you know, or homaged in movies, and I don't know. So I think, so that's the second reason, is because of this cultural capital distance. And then I guess the third is more spiritual, for lack of a better term, which is that, I talk about this in the chapter on art and on freedom, but I think that because of the kind of ludicrousness and like repellent nature of so many of the elements of the art market, especially at its highest echelons, I think that people can have a really, can get a really diluted sense of like who makes art and what happens with it in the world, whereas like the vast majority of art that's made doesn't sell, and is made in smaller communities that have to kind of sustain each other to have a life in art. It's not becoming a winner in an increasingly, you know, ridiculous art faired world market. I guess I just want to pay homage to that wherever I can, because I think otherwise we, at the cost of making a good critique and a good necessary critique, we also warp what, again, like a kind of 1% are doing or getting from the art market, from what 99%, I mean, I'm making up these statistics of what actual artists live. So anyway, those are some of my reasons.
We're going to fact check that.
Yes, I'm not saying it's true, but I am saying that, at least in my own personal experience, that some of my friends who actually make a lot of money selling art, I guarantee you've never heard of them, and that 10 collectors have heard of them, and that they have assistants making the work, and it's not an art form, and it's just not, it's like a whole different world, you know. I mean, they do collide sometimes, you know, but not quite in the way that people imagine. I mean, anyone here on this call can feel free to completely differ with me, and you know, that kind of thing. But
So there's no fear of inside trading. If I knew that Maggie Nelson is writing a good piece about an artist, I could invest and then make a bunch of money after. I see. Okay, fine.
no, I mean, I think it's funny. Like, I think, I mean, that said, I do think that I'm not really thinking about it vis-a-vis like money or like capital. But I do think about, I mean, part of my decision to write about work that I like or that I really strongly admire is that if I can lift some people up, like Alice Notley, the Restacks, who I have an essay about, you know, like people who are lesser known or work in mediums. The video art does not sell because there's not much object to sell. You know, poetry, clearly, like if there's anything that I know that maybe my writing about that I love and want to pay homage to, and I think that there's some kind of cultural capital that I could afford it, I'm always happy to do it, you know.
Taylor Swift's stock is going to go up in
Yeah,
about
exactly. She needs me desperately.
I can ask a question if there aren't any others, but please, if you have any, just raise your hand. Maggie, I was really struck by not just sort of the range of objects and topics and modes of conversing about them, but also just sort of the timeline through which your criticism unfolds, right? So at times it almost reads like you're somewhat in a dialogue, right, with your own self. And it seems like most of the essays are sort of published, or conversations and essays are published somewhat chronologically, right? Starting.
Yeah, the whole thing's chronological.
Right. So I was kind of curious, especially thinking about your review of the Eve Sedgwick posthumous collection, The Weather and Proust, which I loved that piece. I hadn't read it until seeing it in this collection, where she talks about, where you talk about her talking about the space between knowing something and then realizing it, in which realizing, you know, her example is death, like, you know, you're going to die, but realizing it perhaps takes a little longer. Just, this is a very broad question, but was there something that you learned in any sort of delayed or retroactive mode or mood, in either just collecting this, reading it, rereading it, yeah, sort of your dialogue, I guess, or your conversation with yourself.
I think you just kind of nailed it, which is like what Eve Sedgwick is talking about knowing and realizing. Not only is it like the gulf between them, and as you said, in her case, she's talking about mortality, but it's also like she points out, like it's repetitive. Like this gap between knowing and realizing, like goes on and on. You know, we're like we think we know, and then we realize we didn't know, and we thought we knew, and we realized we didn't know. I would just say my experience in putting this together is like I sound kind of wise in some of these early pieces, like I knew certain things that I feel like I don't know now, or I have unknown and have realized again. And the main challenge in putting it together was like that my interests have been repetitive. So I didn't want the book to feel repetitive, but it was very interesting to see how repetitive my interests actually are over 20 years, and to see how, I guess there's both knowing and realizing, right? And kind of unknowing. Like I feel like I know less than I do now, because I think when I started, like in some of these essays, maybe when I was 30 and now I'm 51, like maybe I thought there was more knowledge to be had or something, or like I would get it or something, and now I realize that's not so. But I guess the other thing, you know, beyond that is that like there's like a repetitiveness of the themes, but I think I got more excited about how like every artist, they refract through really differently, and it kind of made me feel like part of the repetitiveness, you know, as one says, it's like repetition with a difference. So I may be revisiting the same ideas, but every artist makes me think about it differently, and that's the pleasure of other people, you know, basically.
It's lovely. Erin.
Hi, I was so sad that my last meeting ran over and was only able to join for part of this discussion. My question is not about like Lev in particular, but about some of the things that have been touched upon in this conversation in relation to your work more broadly, which I'm a great admirer. I really liked it, kind of the kind of breaking down of, okay, there's not a Dr. Nelson and Miss Maggie that I think David suggested before. And you know, I think that your work, you know, even if we can't say that there's a school of Maggie Nelson, which I'm not convinced that there's not, that your work absolutely is having an effect on the way that especially younger scholars and writers and thinkers are giving themselves permission, you know, to write today. And I think that one really crucial shift or potential shift, I guess I'll be kind of cautiously optimistic, is that, you know, while we in the academy, and I think many of us here are in academic institutions, are encouraged to be kind of public intellectuals, to engage in public facing humanities. So that might be, you know, writing for LA Review of Books, it might be, you know, curating an exhibition. We're often discouraged from changing the kind of writing we're doing that's recognized institutionally. And so I think that what your work is doing, and I guess really in some ways this is a question for you, Maggie, but also for you, David, and for you, Michel, and for you, Jane, who's also, you know, your writing is a great example as well. How can we sort of push our institutions to make more space for the theorizing you do, for example, on freedom? You know, like that, to me, I mean, that's why, like, that is a great example of how an academic book should be written, in my opinion.
Maggie, I'll just say we have 2 minutes.
Oh my God, what could I say in 2 minutes? I mean, I feel like I'm you know, Michel and David like are better probably with this. Like I'm kind of new to the stodginesses of the academic, you know, what like world. I think that people are a little bit, I think you're right though, to note that people are a little confused right now, where there's like precisely what you said, like pressure to be public facing and kind of like make the humanities matter in some kind of way with more reach, while at the same time not like moving you know, like a friend of mine was just telling me the other day that she couldn't get a book to count for, I'm not going to name where the publisher was, but like a book for her tenure clock with like a perfectly reputable, fantastic press, in my opinion. And I just thought, oh my God, that's lunacy. But I don't know anything about all that because I mean, I think I have a more, and I hesitate to say this because I know it's a USC call, but I have a more like, you know, undercommons idea of like the university, which is like, come what may, the election, come what may, and the world, like, I feel like these are good hours to be spending in our lives, like together, like right now on the Zoom call, like doing this with all of us. I don't care what it ends up being called or what the names of the institutions are. I just want to keep having space to keep doing this, you know.
Amazing, because we had 2 minutes and I feel like you leave us in such a good place at a time that feels so far from good often. Thank you. We are exactly at time. So thank you, Maggie, for this wonderful book and for the conversation that it has provoked. Thank you so much to Michel Chaouli and David Kishik for joining us in conversation. Thank you, Jane Ho, for moderating, and thank you to the Department of English and the Department of Gender and Sexuality for partnering with us in this discussion. Now, if you haven't read the book, you really must go out and get it and read it. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jane, Michelle, David.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye, you guys. Take good care. Bye.